The air in the abandoned Blackwood Sanatorium is a stagnant metallic film, thick with the scent of dried blood and forgotten medication. A solitary, oscillating desk fan struggles in the middle of a hallway, its circular shadow a grotesque, stuttering metronome against peeling, mold-stained walls. In the dim, suffocating light, the silhouette of a cheap, worn cassette recorder rests on a nightstand in what was once room 313, the single red RX light glowing like a malevolent, watchful eye. A chilling, crystalline sound, the breaking of bone followed by a wet, guttural choke, is the first thing that cuts through the silence on the tape. It's not the sound of a struggle, it's the sound of a procedure. Then comes the whimper of a woman, low and desperate, not for help, but for cessation. The walls of room 313, painted a horrifying shade of institutional green, now obscured by years of grime and decay, seem to constrict around the sound, trapping it in time. A faint, almost imperceptible scratching begins, emanating from within the drywall, like a rat trapped behind a membrane ceaselessly trying to claw its way out. A voice, low and clinical, finally breaks the soundscape of agony. Subject 4, Session 12, documenting the effect of the temporal dissonance projector. Patient exhibiting accelerated catatonia, but the cognitive echo remains intensely active. Note: heart rate stabilization is impossible. The recording continues regardless of power failure. We cannot turn it off. We cannot stop listening. The detached professionalism of the speaker is more terrifying than the screams, suggesting a horror that has become routine, a terror so profound it is now simply a footnote in an experiment log. The whimper stops. Silence. Suddenly the scratching intensifies, no longer from the walls, but seemingly from the recorder itself. The low-frequency bass thrum that follows is a physical sensation, vibrating the floorboards, making the air feel heavy and resonant. A new sound joins the horrific symphony, a child's laughter, high-pitched and pure, layered unnervingly over the metallic, dragging sound of something impossibly heavy being pulled across rough concrete. The laughter seems to loop, growing increasingly distorted, dissolving into a sound like tearing fabric. Then finally, silence again. The tape continues to spool, but the recording is blank. No hiss, no static, only the low, magnetic hum of the machine functioning perfectly in an empty room. This perfect, resonant silence is violently broken by a whisper, right in the listener's ear, clear and wet, like breath drawn through grave dirt. You shouldn't have listened. Now you're part of the echo. The last sound is a heavy, decisive thud, as if the recorder itself had been abruptly dropped or perhaps thrown against a wall by a final, desperate act. What unholy temporal mechanism allowed the sheer essence of a soul's final, agonizing moment to be permanently imprinted onto magnetic tape, defying decay, death, and logic? And if the recording device continues to capture something that has been dead for decades, what happens when the listener is pulled into the infinite loop of its terrifying, final echo? What monstrous thing does the silence between the sounds truly hide? The Blackwood Sanatorium, a sprawling Gothic monument to early 20th century psychological intervention, stands on a bleak outcrop overlooking the coastal town of Oak Haven, Massachusetts. Built in 1910 and shuttered abruptly in 1968, the imposing granite structure embodies a grim Victorian sensibility, its very architecture suggesting confinement and dread. Oak Haven itself is a town steeped in a quiet coastal melancholia, where the history of witchcraft trials and maritime disasters still weaves through the local folklore like seaweed clinging to a stone. The area is constantly shrouded in a heavy, sea-scented fog, lending the sanatorium an even more spectral presence. The true horror of Blackwood, and the focus of The Last Recording, centers on the final 2 years of its operation, specifically within the clandestine, experimental wing. This wing was host to a series of highly unethical, government-sanctioned psychological projects, euphemistically termed the Temporal Dissonance Project, TDP. The TDP, led by the enigmatic and deeply disturbed Dr. Alistair Finch, sought to isolate and manipulate the human mind's perception of linear time through a combination of extreme sensory deprivation, high-frequency auditory pulses, and, most disturbingly, what records refer to only as the etheric induction field. This was where Room 303 came into being, a specialized soundproofed cell designed for the ultimate subject isolation. Our main witness and accidental inheritor of the horror is Ara Vance, a 32-year-old independent audio archivist, an investigative podcaster specializing in lost media and anomalous sound phenomena. Ilara is driven not by morbid curiosity, but by a professional, almost obsessive need to catalog and understand unsolvable recordings. Her background is in acoustic engineering, giving her a technical, skeptical filter that is slowly being eroded by the sheer impossibility of what she has found. She is meticulous, focused, and initially dismissive of supernatural claims, preferring to search for infrasound, frequency contamination, or elaborate hoaxes. The initial account that draws Ilara to Blackwood comes from Martin Hollis, an 80-year-old former groundskeeper at the sanatorium. Martin, now a recluse, provided a chilling, fragmented testimony to a local historical society, detailing the last days of Blackwood. He spoke of the humming, a low-frequency vibration that permeated the earth around the experimental wing, even after the lights were off. He claimed to have seen Dr. Finch rush out of the wing one night, his face a mask of primal terror, clutching a single reel-to-reel tape machine and muttering, "It won't stop. It's feeding on the echo." Martin's account emphasizes a deep, chilling conviction that the machine itself is cursed, not the building. The cultural context of Oakhaven is key. Local legends speak of the whispering tide, the belief that the souls of those lost at sea, or those unjustly executed, are captured in the endless rush of the waves, their despair accumulating in the very air. Dr. Finch's experiments, which aimed to capture time, inadvertently tapped into this reservoir of ambient psychic residue. The dark tone is set by the knowledge that the recording is not merely an echo of a past event, but an active container, a sound loop that doesn't replay history, but continuously reenacts a single, terrifying final moment of psychological obliteration. The question for Ilara is not what is on the tape, but who is keeping it playing, and how close she is to joining the performance. The history of the Blackwood Sanatorium is one of gradual descent from therapeutic intention to sheer institutional terror. Initially conceived as a progressive facility for nervous disorders, its fortunes turned sharply in the 1950s with the arrival of Dr. Alistair Finch, a man obsessed with the relationship between time perception and psychic trauma. Finch secured significant shadowy funding for his Temporal Dissonance Project, TDP, converting the isolated East Wing into a shielded laboratory. The official record states the TDP was simply research into extreme chronotherapy. The unofficial truth, whispered by former staff like groundskeeper Martin Hollis, suggests human experimentation on the nature of the soul's relationship to linear time. The first palpable signs of an underlying horror were not visible, but purely auditory. Whispers began circulating in Oakhaven long before the sanatorium closed. Local fishermen complained of a deep, resonant thrumming that their sonar equipment would pick up miles out at sea, a pulsing sound they couldn't attribute to any known vessel or geological activity. They dubbed it the Blackwood hum. At night, residents living closest to the outcrop reported hearing a peculiar, distorted echo of sound before the sound itself occurred. A faint, backward scream preceding a distant ambulance siren, or the sound of breaking glass moments before a window actually shattered. The community of Oakhaven is a tight-knit, insular group, heavily influenced by generations of seafaring superstition. They are inherently suspicious of outsiders and scientific overreach. The sanatorium had always been seen as an unclean place, a magnet for suffering. Secondary characters introduced through Ara Vance's research include Agnes Murchison, the town's elderly, blind historian who communicates primarily through meticulously kept journals, and Father Thomas, the weary priest of the local Catholic parish, whose quiet resignation speaks volumes about the darkness he is forced to live alongside. Agnes's journals describe an old Wampanoag legend of a time eater, a spirit that traps the final moments of great suffering in an endless loop, feeding on the residual agony. She writes, "The metal machine on the hill is its new cage, and its key. The physical environment is oppressive. Ilara's first visit to the periphery reveals the sheer isolation. The sea fog rolls in thick and cold, smelling of salt and decay. The path leading up to Blackwood is overgrown, lined with gnarled skeletal trees. Even the air feels heavy, pressurized. The east wing, where room 313 is located, has a single, boarded-up window facing the cliff, where the wind creates a high, mournful whine that is indistinguishable from a trapped, distant scream. The atmosphere is not one of typical haunting, but of profound temporal sickness. The silence itself feels manipulated, stretched, and ready to snap. The first and most terrifying sign for Ilara is a faint, almost subliminal sound in her own field recordings near the perimeter. A high-frequency chirp that acoustic analysis confirms is human speech played at an exponentially accelerated speed. She can't decipher it, but it sounds like a desperate plea for release. This preliminary evidence confirms the core horror. The temporal echo is active and waiting. The manifestation of the horror solidifies when Ilara finally gains illegal access to the east wing of the Blackwood Sanatorium, guided by Martin Hollis's reluctant map. The moment she steps across the threshold of the experimental wing, the oppressive silence is broken by a static low-level buzz, a signature of failing ancient electronics. She finds room 313 exactly as described, small, lined with acoustic dampening panels that are now shredded and hanging like decaying skin, and in the center, a rusted, bolted-down examination table. The centerpiece of the discovery is the relic itself, the cassette recorder. It is an obsolete industrial-grade machine, bolted to the metal nightstand, and, impossibly, still powered by a defunct internal battery. The red REC light is indeed glowing. A single ancient cassette tape labeled crudely in Finch's hand, Subject 4, Final Session, is jammed into the deck. The disturbing evidence is not just the recorder, but the deep, crescent-shaped scoring on the wooden floor leading from the table towards the door. Too large to be a person's foot, too precise to be random dragging. It looks like something with immense weight, perhaps strapped down, tried desperately to pivot or pull itself free. Initial detailed accounts come from the content of the tape. Using portable equipment, Ilara manages a safe, brief playback. The recording begins with the clinical sound of equipment being calibrated, followed by the terrifying, distinctive sound of the temporal dissonance projector starting up, a cycling, low-frequency hum that makes her teeth ache. The core, horrifying account is the subject's final descent. Subject 4, identified as a woman named Lillian Hayes, initially responds coherently, describing the sound as the ocean flowing backwards. But as the experiment progresses, her voice changes, becoming multiple voices at once. A young girl, an old man, and her own adult voice, all overlapping, screaming contradictory phrases like, "I see the end," and "I am already forgotten." The tape captures the moment of temporal collapse where Lillian's mind experiences past, present, and future simultaneously, creating a single agonizing scream. The immediate reaction is visceral terror. When Ilara plays the segment of the woman's multi-layered scream, the high-pitched childish laughter from the hook spontaneously cuts in live from the room, not from the speakers. It is a wet, echoing sound that vibrates the inner ear. Ilara, a staunch skeptic, feels a paralyzing dread realizing this is not an echo but an interaction. Her terror is compounded by a physical phenomenon. The air temperature around the recorder drops instantaneously to near freezing, and the humidity spikes, making the metal of her microphone fog up instantly, confirming a massive, localized energy drain. First theories about the supernatural presence emerge immediately in Ilara's mind. It's not a ghost in the traditional sense. Dr. Finch's experiments in trying to manipulate the physical perception of time accidentally created a temporal anchor, a focal point where the sheer trauma of Lillian Hayes's final moments has been permanently fixed and continues to loop, broadcasting its agony. The machine itself, the cassette recorder, is not the source of the recording but the conduit. It is receiving the continuous, uninterrupted broadcast of a soul's final psychic collapse, perhaps indefinitely. The scoring on the floor and the conflicting voices suggest Lillian didn't just die. Her entire timeline was momentarily ripped open, leaving a physical, acoustic scar on reality itself. Alara knows she must not stop listening. The key to understanding, and perhaps stopping the loop, is in the full context of Subject 4's final, horrifying transmission. Alara's initial investigation shifts from documentation to a desperate attempt at containment and contextualization. She secures the original cassette and the industrial recorder, knowing that leaving it in the sanatorium would be a form of abandonment to the horror. Her first major step is an in-depth analysis of the tape's magnetic properties. The results are scientifically impossible. The tape's signal-to-noise ratio is near perfect, inconsistent with 50-year-old oxide, and the magnetic fields are layered in complex, non-linear patterns that modern physics cannot explain. Her acoustic engineering mentor, a retired professor named Dr. Marcus Klein, initially believes the data is corrupted, until Alara plays the segment where Lillian's voice splits into 3 distinct, simultaneous frequencies, mathematically impossible for a single human voice box. Klein hears it and immediately withdraws from assisting, leaving a chilling email. The tape is resonating with a field outside of standard reality. It's not a recording, Alara. It's a receiver. Key testimonies are extracted from the few surviving records concerning the TDP. Alara finds a heavily redacted daily log from a junior nurse, Sarah Jennings. The nurse's testimony speaks volumes through its cautious euphemisms. She repeatedly notes severe energetic leakage and unpredictable spatial distortions near room 313. One entry is particularly fear-inducing. October 14, 1968. Patient 4 exhibited temporal bleeding. Dr. Finch insisted on recording. Said the agony was essential data. I saw her hand age 20 years in a single minute on the operating table. When I looked away and back, it was normal again. Her scream was like an inverse mirror. Preliminary disturbing discoveries mount. While analyzing the full 90-minute recording, Alara hears a section of 30 minutes of pure static, standard for a blank tape. However, running the static through a differential frequency analyzer reveals an intricate, patterned signal within the noise, an embedded, oscillating structure. When she removes the static filter, she can hear a faint, distant voice, singing a simple, childlike lullaby. The horror lies in the fact that the lullaby sounds distorted, like it's being sung through water, and the pitch shifts subtly, randomly, independent of the tape speed. The true discovery is that the entity inside the recording can manipulate the very fabric of the recording medium itself. Public terror and paranoia begin to grow not because of the sanatorium, which is mostly forgotten, but because of Alara's own activities. She is forced to play the tape in small, shielded bursts to cross-reference the unique sounds. Neighbors near her isolated suburban studio report strange disturbances, their digital clocks resetting to random years, 1953-2042, and their home security cameras briefly capturing a blurry, elongated shadow moving at impossible speed. Father Thomas, hearing of Alara's work from a worried Oakhaven contact, sends her an unnerving, handwritten note. The time eater must not be brought into the light. It has eaten the light of room 313. Send it back to the dark before it learns to feed on the silence. The growing paranoia is fueled by the knowledge that the horror is no longer confined to the remote sanatorium. It is now an auditory infection, spreading through the modern world. The investigation hits a critical, terrifying juncture when new discoveries violently shatter all of Alara's remaining logical theories. The first twist concerns the metallic scraping sound noted in the hook. Alara had initially dismissed it as a gurney or equipment being moved. However, after isolating and amplifying the specific sound frequency, she realizes its pattern is too complex, too deliberate. The sound is not a scrape, but a form of magnetic telegraphy. She translates the distinct clicks and drags into a series of highly encrypted Morse code sequences. When decrypted, the message is chillingly simple. Where is my time? Followed by a random 8-digit sequence that corresponds to no known code, date, or location. The central contradiction arises when Alara cross-references Lillian Hayes's patient file, subject 4, with the timestamps on Dr. Finch's few surviving medical notes. The tape is dated October 15, 1968, 2:14 a.m. The medical record states that Lillian Hayes had already been declared dead from a sudden, unexplained aneurysm on October 12, 1968. This violently disproves the linear narrative. The final recording of room 313 was made 3 days after the subject had officially died. The implication is horrifying. Dr. Finch was not recording Lillian's death, but the recording of her residual trauma, the psychic signature of her agony, captured by the TDP and fixed to the cassette. The escalation of supernatural activity is both subtle and catastrophic. While analyzing the temporal bleeding segment, Ara notices something visually impossible. The oxide layer on the tape reel itself seems to briefly flicker, as if the physical medium is struggling to contain the recorded information. She sets up a high-speed thermal camera to monitor the tape during playback. The recordings show brief, intense bursts of heat radiating from the tape itself, not from the machine, specifically during the multi-layered scream segment. Furthermore, the 8-digit random sequence from the Morse code reappears, scratched into the metallic casing of the recorder, a pattern of damage that was not there moments before. A theory is violently disproven when Ara attempts a countermeasure. Believing the temporal anchor is powered by the TDP's residual frequencies, she tries to wash the tape by exposing it to an extreme dose of pure, organized white noise, hoping to neutralize the signal. The white noise, instead of cleansing, is immediately consumed. The tape plays back the organized static, but an additional, utterly unnatural sound is layered on top. The sound of her own voice, 1 minute in the future, shouting, "Stop! It's listening!" Before the tape violently snaps, shredding the end section and releasing a metallic-smelling puff of cold vapor. Ara realizes the entity or the temporal echo is not a passive recording. It is an active, malevolent intelligence capable of interacting with and manipulating reality outside its tape cage, and it is fully aware of her efforts to destroy it. The snapping of the tape marks a descent into a much more intensive and desperate phase of the investigation. Ara, now facing an intelligent supernatural entity, realizes she needs a different kind of expertise. She reaches out to Dr. Elias Thorne, a disgraced but brilliant former academic specializing in fringe theories of quantum entanglement and consciousness, who now operates a small, clandestine paranormal research center. Thorne is skeptical of spirits, but obsessed with the concept of temporal residue, energy patterns left by extreme trauma that can persist and interact with reality through certain rare conductive materials. The cassette recorder, he posits, is the ultimate conductive resonator. Thorne's intervention brings horrifying revelations. Using specialized equipment, he performs a psychomagnetic scan on the recorder. The scan reveals a densely layered field that confirms the theory of the temporal anchor. But the chilling part is the secondary signature, a distinct, smaller parasitic psychic field surrounding Lillian Hayes, which Thorne identifies as belonging to Dr. Alistair Finch himself. Thorne theorizes that Finch, while conducting his horrific experiment, wasn't just recording the event. He was attempting to entangle his consciousness with the temporal collapse, hoping to experience a moment outside of linear time. He failed, and his own psychic trauma was sucked into the loop, binding him to Subject 4's agony, perhaps as an observer, or worse, as a perpetual victim. The connections to other dark cases are brought to light by Thorne's archived research. He reveals a forgotten series of government-funded psychological weapon projects in the 1960s, codenamed Project Echo, which sought to use synchronized auditory and temporal distortion to induce mass hysteria and psychological collapse in enemy populations. The TDP was a rogue, extreme offshoot of Project Echo. Thorne provides evidence of 3 similar, though less complete, temporal residue incidents across the U.S., all involving modified magnetic recording equipment and sensory deprivation. In all 3 cases, the equipment was found, but the operating scientist and the subject vanished without a trace, leaving only an incomprehensible, looping audio file. The terrifying new context is that the entity on the tape is not just Lillian Hayes' suffering, but a conflation of 2 souls, the tormented and the tormentor, trapped together in a temporal feedback loop. the time eater from the Wampanoag legend now possessing the dual consciousness of agony and clinical sadism. Alara and Thorne decide on a plan. They must isolate Finch's parasitic signature and attempt to extract it, hoping to collapse the loop. The process is fraught with immense risk, as any attempt to tamper with the anchor could unleash the concentrated, 5-decade-old temporal trauma in an instantaneous burst. The revelation that Finch is a part of the horror, not just the cause, deepens the nightmare exponentially. The crucial moment where terror peaks is the execution of Thorne's desperate plan. They have relocated the recorder and Alara's equipment to a secure underground bunker shielded by a complex network of Faraday-cages, hoping to limit the temporal anchor's influence. The plan is to broadcast a specific, counter-frequency pulse designed to resonate only with the distinct psychic signature of Dr. Finch, hoping to momentarily destabilize his parasitic entanglement with Lillian Hayes's core trauma. As the counter-frequency generator winds to life, the temperature in the bunker plummets instantly. The low-frequency bass thrum from the tape intensifies, vibrating the very air until it hurts the ears. The discovery of key evidence reveals the true, horrific nature of the loop. On a spectral analysis screen monitoring the combined audio signatures, a new visual pattern emerges, a terrifying fractal waveform that is mathematically impossible in nature. Thorne, his face pale with dread, realizes the truth. The loop is not a simple repetition of a past event. It is a self-optimizing algorithm of despair. Every time the agony plays, the loop learns, adapts, and intensifies the next iteration, making the suffering exponentially worse. The entity is growing in power with every passing second it remains active. Tension is at its absolute height. The magnetic reel on the cassette recorder begins to spin wildly, independent of the motor. The lights in the bunker flicker, and then the counter-frequency generator explodes in a shower of sparks. The resulting silence is the most terrifying sound yet. Alara and Thorne are plunged into complete darkness, save for the faint red glow of the recorder's rec light which pulses with the beat of a wildly erratic heart. The tape suddenly plays a new sound, one never heard before, a desperate, choked-off dialogue between two voices. Lillian, weak. Finch, let go. You have to let go. Finch, a low, wet rasp. No, Lillian. I need the data. I need to see outside. I will not let go. We are one. Forever. The key evidence is revealed in this final, horrifying exchange. Finch is not a passive victim. He is actively maintaining the link, believing the shared agony grants him insight into the non-linear nature of time, feeding the time eater with their combined despair. The breaking point is the realization that the entity is not a random echo, but a conscious, codependent horror that wants to be recorded and broadcast. And now, it knows they are trying to stop it. The metallic scratching returns, impossibly loud, not from the recorder, but from behind Alara, as if an immense clawed hand is dragging itself across the heavy steel bunker door. They must destroy the recorder now, or be pulled into the next loop. The moment of greatest horror is the direct, unexplainable confrontation. Plunged into darkness, Alara and Thorne realize the scratching is a prelude to the physical manifestation of the anchor's energy. The sound of the Temporal Dissonance Projector's rhythmic, deep hum begins to emanate from the walls themselves, and the air around them seems to distort, wavering like heat above asphalt. They can see their own faint, shimmering outlines, slightly out of sync with their physical bodies, a terrifying visual representation of their own temporal integrity starting to fray. Final terrifying revelations emerge from the recorder itself. As the entity senses the approaching destruction, the tape begins to emit a blinding, cold, white light. The voices of Lillian and Finch swell into a chaotic, overwhelming cacophony. In a moment of absolute clarity, the voice of Finch screams, "The 8 digits! It's the temporal key, the reverse frequency. It opens the loop." The 8-digit sequence they couldn't decipher is revealed as the specific, unique frequency that Dr. Finch programmed to close the loop, a failsafe he never deployed. The direct confrontation with the unexplainable is visceral. A shadow coalesces in the center of the bunker, Not a physical form, but a dense, swirling cloud of psychomagnetic static, an inverted, colorless silhouette of a man hunched over a machine. It emits a pulse of pure, soundless terror that knocks Thorne unconscious. Alara, driven by a desperate, frantic energy, realizes the only way to stop the growing fractal of agony is to physically destroy the conduit. She remembers the temporal key and quickly inputs the 8-digit sequence into her portable audio generator, broadcasting the reverse frequency directly into the microphone of the still recording cassette machine. The impact is devastating. The moment the frequency hits, the white light from the recorder turns a searing, agonizing blue, and the magnetic tape instantly turns to brittle, gray ash, not burning, but dematerializing. The two voices on the tape let out a final, impossibly loud, simultaneous shriek, the sound of an energy loop collapsing into a void. The shadow figure in the room contorts violently, its static form violently contracting, before it is instantly sucked back into the now silent, empty cassette deck casing. The sudden cessation of sound, the absolute absence of the hum, static, or the persistent red light, is a shock that registers deeper than any noise. The emotional and physical impact is immediate. Alara feels a crushing, momentary disorientation, the loss of 5 decades of ambient psychic trauma leaving a terrifying vacuum in her mind, like a piece of her own linear time had been momentarily ripped away. She is left standing, gasping, alone with the silent, cold metal shell of the recorder. The resolution of the mystery is unsettlingly ambiguous. The temporal anchor has been destroyed. The physical tape is gone, and the recorder's internal power source has finally died. The red RX light extinguished forever. The temporal key sequence worked, forcing the Finch-Hayes entity to collapse in on itself, effectively sealing the loop permanently. However, the question of whether the souls were released or merely contained is left unanswered. Doctor. Thorne, upon waking, notes a fundamental, chilling absence in the air, a silence that is too perfect. He theorizes the entity was not a ghost but a temporal distortion, and by collapsing the loop, they simply scrubbed that specific moment of suffering from existence, but the potential for recurrence remains. The long-term psychological consequences for the survivors are profound. Doctor. Thorne, unable to cope with the reality of what he witnessed, completely abandons his research, retreating into self-imposed isolation and a belief that the pursuit of understanding fringe reality is a form of blasphemy. Ara Vance, the Archivist, is left with a perpetual, subtle temporal sickness. She occasionally experiences microechoes, brief, momentary bursts of sound from a future she has not yet lived, a fragment of a sentence from a conversation next week, the chime of a doorbell hours before it rings. She is perpetually off-kilter, living a fraction of a second outside of her own present, making her a constant, unwilling witness to time's nonlinear nature. She is unable to listen to any form of recorded audio without a creeping sense of dread. The current state of the haunted location reflects the partial resolution. The Blackwood Sanatorium is demolished under a municipal order citing structural instability and environmental cleanup concerns. The East Wing, where room 313 stood, is now a massive, sterile concrete pad, covered with heavy steel grating. The townspeople of Oakhaven claim the fog around the outcrop has slightly receded, but they still report a complete absence of birdsong near the site. The silence there is not peaceful. It is a profound, pressurized anti-sound, a reminder of the vacuum where agony once pulsed. The reflection on what remains unexplained is the true sting of the legacy. The 8-digit temporal key sequence, the failsafe Dr. Finch never used, was discovered after his death in a final act of desperation by his imprisoned psyche. Did Finch, in his final, tormented moments inside the loop, gain the true insight he craved, realizing the monstrous nature of his experiment and providing the means for its destruction? Or was the key itself just another final, desperate trap? The cultural impact and ongoing fear are subtle but lasting. In Oakhaven, the local superstition has a new, terrifying component. No one records their children's voices, no one saves old cassette tapes, and any mention of a perfect silence is met with a deep religious shudder, for they know that the time eater may be gone, but the potential for a new, even more sophisticated temporal anchor persists. waiting for the right kind of extreme human suffering and the right kind of machine to begin the horrifying recording anew.